You know, how can a leader be so powerful that it's said even evil itself would get out of his way, but at the same time live with such deep humility that he saw himself as just one of the people? It's a pretty incredible paradox, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today by looking at the life of Umar ibn al-Khattab. We're going to dive into some key stories that really paint a picture of a leader defined by faith, humility, and an unbelievable sense of duty.
The stories we're about to get into, they've been passed down for centuries, and not just as history lessons, but as real sources of inspiration. The hope is always that these kinds of lessons in leadership might just land with someone who needs to hear them. So with that in mind, let's begin.
Okay, so our first look at Umar's character is all about his sheer presence. And we're not just talking about charisma here. This was something else. It was this commanding, awe-inspiring aura that everyone respected. And according to tradition, even forces you can't see had to respect it.
All right, so picture this. There's a lively, kind of loud discussion happening at the Prophet Muhammad's home. And then the moment Umar ibn al-Khattab just asks for permission to come in, boom, total silence. Just his voice, He didn't even give a command. That alone was enough to completely change the entire vibe of the room.
But here's the part that's really, really revealing. It's Umar's reaction. Instead of soaking it in, feeling proud of that respect, he's actually shocked. He immediately turns it around, asking why on earth they'd fear him more than the prophet. It's just this incredible display of his own humility and his deep, deep respect for his leader.
And then the story wraps up with this unbelievable validation from the prophet himself. And look, this is way more than just a compliment. It's a profound spiritual testament. The image this paints is just wow. Think about it. Umar's faith is so solid, so unshakable, that Satan himself would literally take a different road just to avoid crossing paths with him. Just let that sink in for a second.
So this incredible spiritual standing, it wasn't just something people saw in his day-to-day life. It was actually confirmed in a more divine way, through the symbolic dreams of the prophet. And these dreams were seen as a kind of heavenly testimony.
Yeah, there are these two specific dreams that were told, and they use these really powerful metaphors to get to the very core of who Umar was as a person. People didn't see these as just random dreams, but as real divine insights into his two most defining qualities.
So check this out. In the first dream, shirts were a symbol for faith. Some people's shirts were short, but Umar's, his was so long he was literally dragging it on the ground. That represented a faith that just covered everything. Then in the second dream, milk was the symbol for knowledge. The prophet drank some and then passed what was left over to Umar. The interpretation was pretty clear. Umar had this massive amount of divinely inspired knowledge. So you put those two visions together and you get a portrait of a man defined by just unmatched faith and deep, deep wisdom.
Okay, so this brings us to a really fascinating contrast. You've got this man with all this immense spiritual and political power. So how does a guy like that actually live his life? Well, as the Caliph, Umar's personal life was basically a masterclass in humility and simplicity. He had all this power, but he lived a life of extreme, asceticism.
Think about it. At a time when most rulers are living it up in palaces, Umar, the leader of this rapidly growing state, chose to do the complete opposite. He drew this firm, uncrossable line between the state's wealth and his own personal life. For him, being a leader wasn't about getting perks, it was about holding himself to the absolute highest standard of accountability.
Get this, his personal allowance was famously simple, just 2 garments from the treasury. That's it. And his food? He insisted it should be exactly the same as what an average person was eating. This whole philosophy is really captured in his powerful statement, "I am as one of the men among the Muslims." That wasn't just a nice thing to say, it was the very definition of his leadership. He saw himself as a servant, not a king.
But you see, his personal humility wasn't just about how he dressed or what he ate. It was rooted in something much, much deeper. This profound, all-consuming sense of responsibility he felt for every single person under his rule. And this belief, it was about to be put to the ultimate test.
Yeah, the ultimate test of his leadership came during this absolutely devastating famine. They called it the Year of the Ashes. It was a time of just immense suffering for everyone. And for Umar, this wasn't just some political problem he had to manage from a distance. No way. It was a personal burden that he carried with him every single moment of every day.
And this is where we get perhaps his most famous and powerful statement. And trust me, it wasn't just talk. It became his strict personal policy.
He refused any kind of luxury, even something as basic as eating until he was full, as long as he knew even one person in his state was hungry. For him, a leader couldn't just, understand the people's pain. A leader had to feel it firsthand.
The depth of his empathy was just truly profound. This wasn't an act, it wasn't for show, it was a deep internal anguish. In fact, it's said that the weight of his people's suffering was so heavy on him that it started to physically affect his health. The feeling was that if the famine had gone on any longer, he might have literally died from grief and concern.
So, when we put all these powerful stories together, what do they ultimately show us? Well, they paint this incredible, multifaceted picture of a leader whose entire legacy is built on this really rare combination of immense strength on one hand and profound service on the other.
So, we've seen a leader with this awe-inspiring presence, right? Unshakable faith and deep knowledge. But what really makes his story stick with you, what makes it so enduring, is the balance. All of that power was perfectly matched by this deep, personal humility and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. It's that rare mix of strength and service that truly defines his legacy.
And so all of this leaves us with a question that really echoes through time. After looking at this portrait of leadership, what do you think are the timeless qualities of a true leader? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this one.